The number one mistake that amateur golfers make with the wrists in the golf swing is how they transition from the backswing into the downswing. And today, with the help of the hackmotion wrist sensor, I'm going to help you eliminate that problem once and for all. The number one mistake with the wrist that you're making is the transition from the backswing into the downswing and how you pull incorrectly on this club, which moves the wrists in an inefficient way. Specifically speaking, you are twisting this golf club and spinning the club face open via poor wrist mechanics in transition. And the reason for this is because you've been told you're supposed to pull this thing down like you're pulling a church bell or flushing the chain on a toilet. I've heard that so often. We get to the top and you're supposed to pull down. Unfortunately, that creates very inefficient wrist conditions. Specifically, we start to extend this lead wrist. Extending the wrist means cupping the wrist. We have this angle between the forearm and the back of the wrists. Extending this lead wrist into this open condition leads to slicing, leads to poor contact, leads to loss of distance, a lot of flipping at impact. All of these errors I'm seeing in amateur golfers every single day because you're misunderstanding how the wrists are supposed to move in transition. So at the top of the swing here, in an ideal world, we've got a fairly flat lead arm and lead wrist condition in this parallel or neutral spot right here. And what I'm suggesting that you need to do in order to improve this, and what the best players do, is they move their lead wrist into some flexion in the transition, meaning the wrist goes the opposite direction. It starts to flatten or bow slightly. We have this arch in the wrist here. This is called flexion of the lead wrist. And as we flex the lead wrist and start to move down, we can keep the club face in a much more neutral condition, far less open than it was in the extended version of this downswing. Here you'll note how the club face is pointing up to the sky. And from this position here, you've got no chance, okay? You've got to start swiping across the ball, swinging out to in, and having all the associated problems. So the best players at the top move the wrist slightly into flexion. The poorest players at the top, who hit the worst shots and the lowest distance, are moving this wrist into extension. And as I say, it's this pulling down that you're misunderstanding is hurting your shots and your golf game. Here's some video footage of the best players in the world and how they transition from backswing into downswing. And we have this lead wrist, as I suggested, moving into this more flexed condition. You'll see how these players manage their wrist conditions. And there is a twisting going on. There's a rotation about the shaft that happens within the golf swing. And one thing that I want you to take from this video, if nothing else, is that you are already twisting the golf club as you swing it around you. You're just not aware of it. So your feel that is quite unconscious to move this club around you, and this pulling down that you do instinctively, is twisting the club, but it's twisting it in the wrong direction. You are rotating this club about the grip and about the shaft in the wrong fashion. This would be a clockwise rotation. Okay, spinning the club and opening the face. And what the best players do, without any doubt, is they move an anti-clockwise twist. They place the opposite rotation on the grip, the opposite rotation on the shaft as they start to move down. And as they flex this wrist, they're able to shallow the shaft correctly and keep the club face in a much better position for that final delivery into the ball. So wrist angles are constantly changing. Take that message from this video, if nothing else. And the fact that you don't feel like you're twisting the club right now doesn't mean that you're not. I promise you, you are already putting this twist into the grip. But as I say, you're doing it the wrong way. I'm going to show you now how you can practice twisting the grip the correct way to improve your contact, your ball striking, and your distance. I'm going to show you how to attach the hackmotion wrist sensor and get it working. It really is very, very simple. Just a few seconds to put the sensor over your wrist, fasten it to your arm, and then the second strap that goes over your hand or your glove. There's also another attachment if you want to secure it to your glove strap. That was it. It's now on and it's nearly ready for use. What we need to do now is just calibrate, get the arm and the fingers nice and flat. We touch one button on the screen on the app. We're then going to extend the lead wrist up, so we bend the wrist back towards the forearm. One more touch, and then what you'll see on the screen with the avatar is how it matches the movement of my wrist. That's it. Very simple. A few seconds to set up. We're ready to hit some shots. So now I have the hackmotion sensor on my wrist and it's calibrated. You can see there the avatar moving as I move my hand, the lead wrist into extension, the lead wrist into flexion. Okay, and as I swing, it's going to measure how my wrist is moving. And the great thing about this player app, which is the one that I would be recommending for the majority of you out there who practice on your own, you're going to get some really simple graphics and some really simple feedback to help you understand what you need to do more of, or maybe what you need to do less of in terms of these wrist motions. So at setup, regular grip, a more neutral grip like I have, is going to have a little bit of extension in this lead wrist to start with. That's okay. And then the general pattern would be that most backswings, decent backswings, retain a relatively similar amount of this extension throughout the time and space of the backswing. There can be a small amount of twisting and rotation, but it stays fairly constant. The big difference, as we said, the number one mistake here now as a pull down is the poorest golfer would move this lead wrist into extension, steepen the shaft and open the face. The better player would move this lead wrist in the opposite direction. They would twist the wrist in the opposite direction. This is an anti-clockwise twist, and the club would come down with the face more closed and the shaft more shallow. That allows for a much more efficient delivery. So let me go ahead and just hit a standard one and see what numbers we get on the app. I can explain how these work. Okay, pretty standard shot there, a little push draw. And I've got some data up here on the screen. So you can see how at address, what it does there at address is it measures the amount of extension that I had in my lead wrist to begin with. So the initial tile there on the left, which says plus 20, is just saying it's 20 degrees of extension in this grip of mine, which is pretty standard. That's not too much really for any real range. That's pretty neutral, I would say. And then what would happen typically in the backswing, as I said, is for the most part, you'd want to stay somewhere within that range. Now in that middle tile there, we've got the green color code, which is suggesting we should have somewhere between 10 degrees of extension and 25 degrees of extension. So we started with 20. It's given us a sort of range of 5 to 10 either way. I'm slightly outside of that. I actually ended up flexing my wrist a touch more, but if I was going to have an error, if I was going to look for an error for most golfers, having the face and having the wrist a little more flexed at the top would typically be a better place to be than having it too open. And then in the downswing, again, it gives you a sort of range of where you'd want the twisting to be. And we certainly are looking for, the one thing I would really try and help you to understand is the difference between address and impact. You'll see how the number there has reduced from plus 20 to plus 12. What does that mean in reality? It means my wrist has gone from 20 degrees of extension and then I've flattened it. I've moved it towards some flexion, okay? I've twisted the grip, or I've flexed my wrist some, which is part of what enables me to, number one, close the face sufficiently, and then number two, allows me to deliver some shaft lean. So there's a huge benefit to learning to turn or twist this wrist. And as I've said already, you are already twisting this grip when you swing. You're just not aware of it. I'm going to help you to understand and give you some exercises to help you twist this club the right way, to help you control these wrist angles and hit better shots. The ball striking will improve significantly once you learn to do this motion. So let me give you a drill or two to use in terms of feeling this correct movement. A great one here is to place your palms together, go to the top of your backswing, and here you want to feel like you start to bend your trail wrist backwards. Your lead wrist is going to flex and flatten to the point here where I feel like I'm pointing my fingers and my thumbs down towards the ground. You'll see there's this arch or this bow in this wrist. So from the top where everything's fairly flat, the left arm, the left wrist and the hand, I'm going to push my trail wrist back with my lead wrist there. I'm going to push my trail wrist back, I'm going to bend the wrists in this condition and start to turn and pivot down towards impact. And you'll start to get a sense not only of the wrist conditions that you're looking for, but as you do this slowly to begin with, you'll actually start to move differently. You'll begin to move your body differently. You'll begin to be able to start to turn and transfer into this right tilt, Your wrist angles are going to also help with this arm bend. You'll notice how I'm tilted to the right, I'm beginning to open my turns the correct amount. So it's a really nice exercise of sequencing how the wrists are going to move differently to what you're used to, and then how the arms and body are going to pivot together to get yourself sequenced out nicely. It's a really good one to do without the club and without the ball. And here's a good one with the club and with the ball. To begin with, just make a backswing, get to the top, and then consciously twist the wrists, spin the club. This is often referred to as the motorcycle drill, where you're sort of twisting the throttle of a bike that you would be riding. You're twisting either the lead wrist, the trail wrist, or both. I don't really mind which hand you feel this in. Some people have a preference or more of an awareness that it's happening in this lead wrist, and some people have much more feeling in that trail wrist. As I say, it really doesn't matter. As long as you are twisting this club in transition, you're taking this grip and you are putting a force into it, which is twisting and rotating this club face down. That is a counterclockwise movement. So we get to the top, we twist the wrist in a counterclockwise movement. Practice that feeling coming down. You'll start to get the club into a really nice place for good approach into the ball. One more time to the top, twist the wrists counterclockwise. Notice how the club face closes, the shaft shallows, and we're able to move into the ball much more efficiently than you would be doing if you had the club face in the incorrect position. Club face is king, guys. I've talked about it in many videos before. If you get this right, good things are going to happen. If you get this wrong, the rest of your swing will be a culmination of many, many different compensations to try and help you just make some sort of functional contact. Some valuable information there about how the wrists work in the transition from the backswing into the downswing. And remember, you are already twisting this golf club as you swing it around your body, but you're just not aware of it because your unconscious patterns that you've trained happen without thought. Unfortunately, you likely trained this lead wrist into extension, which, as we've discussed, leads to all those issues with ball striking. If you truly want to improve your wrist angles in the golf swing, the best way to do that is to measure what's actually happening. And there is no better training aid on the market for measuring what's happening with the wrists than the hackmotion wrist sensor. And if you're interested in getting your hands on one of them, at the moment you can benefit from free worldwide shipping by using the code RobCheneyGolf down in the checkout. I'll put the link down in the description. It's free worldwide shipping if you use the code RobCheneyGolf. The wrists are always an interesting subject to make content on, and if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you hit the like button. I have previously made videos on the wrists which have been extremely popular. I will link those down in the description as well for you to go and check out if you're interested in learning more about the complex subject of how the wrists work in the golf swing. If you'd like to learn more specifically about how the trail wrist works in the golf swing, you can go and watch this video next, which discusses the bending backwards and the leaning forwards of the shaft at impact to completely transform your ball striking.